Say goodbye. Say I'll see you later. Let's go. I would like to now introduce Judy Keene, our Director of Communications for Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Reentry. Judy.
Thank you, Deputy Director. We will now begin hearing from our media witnesses. They will share their observations with you. Also to note, there will be no family members from the victim's family present today. Instead, we have been asked to disseminate a statement on behalf of Mike Redman. He is the son of William Patrick Redman. So that statement will be available to you. We will give it to you at the conclusion of the press conference. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first media witness. We will begin with Mark Curtis from KPNX Channel 12. Thank you.
First of all, I have never witnessed an execution before. Murray Hooper was brought into the room, and one of the first things that he asked was why all of the guards were hiding their faces. They were all wearing balaclavas and sunglasses. They didn't answer. I was surprised, but he was in very good humor. In fact, he chuckled throughout the entire process, which took a while. It took the IV team quite a while to find a vein, and they finally went into his femoral artery. They numbed him up and put one line there and another in his arm. At one point, as all of this was going on, he looked through the glass and said, "Can you believe this?" But didn't seem scared, seemed to go back and forth from quiet resignation to his fate to finding humor in what was going on. It took about 12 minutes from the time the drugs started flowing to the time that he was pronounced dead. And it seemed very peaceful. He yawned once the drugs were administered. A few minutes in after the drugs started flowing, he did yawn deeply once and then seemed to fall asleep, and that was it. I can give you some times. At 10:22, the drugs started to flow into his arm and femoral artery. At 10:28, the IV team came in and said that he had been sedated, so that's 6 minutes. And then at 10:34, he was pronounced dead. So 12 minutes from the start of the flow of the drugs to the time of death. Any questions?
For 22 minutes, the team was trying to put the IVs in. Can you describe that process a little bit more? We know they've had problems with that in the past.
Yeah, they first tried his arms. I think they were having trouble finding a good vein. They finally decided to do a small cut down on his femoral artery. They did administer an anesthetic, a local anesthetic, which he laughed about because they said, "We don't want to put you through any extra pain," which he seemed to find funny. But it was difficult for them to do that procedure. I don't know whether it was that they weren't expecting to have to do that, or whether it just took an inordinate amount of time to do that cut-down procedure and find the vein. But they did tell him, we want to get this right.
And you said again, sorry, that the whole process of IV insertion was about 22 minutes? And the cut down and everything?
Roughly 22 to 25 minutes, yep.
Did he appear to be in any pain, Mark?
Not at all, not at all. It was very peaceful from what I could tell.
Can you describe the way the people in the room were operating? Did they seem frustrated, or did it seem like, stressful, or did you hear anything they were saying?
No, I think they were going about their business professionally. I think that it seemed well rehearsed. The IV team consisted of 2 people, and then there were 4 guards and the chaplain in the room with him. The chaplain sat on a stool behind his head with her arms resting on the gurney. she was praying to herself. But no, there never seemed to be any sort of panic or frustration in the room that they couldn't find the vein.
His final statement seemed to be well rehearsed or kind of off the cuff at all?
I think it was probably off the cuff. You know, you heard Director Strada read the statement, but you know, at the end he just said, "Don't be sad for me. That's it. Let's go." I think he seemed to be ready to get it over with. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Colton Krolak with KTAR News. Echo a lot of what Mark said, but I can give you some times. We entered the room at 9:20. Hooper entered at 9:34. He was strapped down. He had leather straps along his chest, his legs, his torso, and his wrists and feet. They did do a cut down, like Mark said. That was finally placed at 10:01. And the second IV, the backup line, was placed at 10:15. At 10:21, the warrant was signed, the death warrant was signed, or read, excuse me. And at 10:22, the drug started flowing. At, At 10:24, he actually said, "What are we waiting on? What are you guys waiting on?" And then very shortly after that, his mouth started shaking slightly. His mouth fell open. He seemed to go to sleep. A few minutes later, 10:28, the doctor came in, checked his pupils, and then said he was sedated. And then at 10:34, that's when the warden came in and said the execution was complete. Any questions?
Well, I'm Bob Christie. I'm with the Associated Press. This is the second execution I've seen here in Florence. The last one was in 2013, I believe. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the IV procedure. That is something that we didn't see 6 or 7 years ago. We do now. The team came in. They assessed him. They assessed both his arms, upper arms, and his in the elbow area to see if there were veins. And they went down and they looked, conversed to each other for a couple minutes, and then they turned to him and they said, "We're going to put one IV in your upper leg and one in your right arm." And then they came in with a kit, a sterile kit, to do the femoral artery. It wasn't technically a cut down. I have some experience with these things, unfortunately, personally, a lot. So I was watching very closely what they did. They did put a sterile sheet on. They used generally a sonogram to find where the femoral artery was. And then at some point during that process, they put a sterile field down. They prepared all the equipment. And then the doctor or nurse, they didn't identify them, apparently could not find the anesthetic that was supposed to be in the kit and searched around for a minute or two looking for it. They brought in a second kit, found it, and during that time he turned to Mr. Hooper and said, "I just don't want you to hurt too much." And that's when we got a little chuckle from him. They got what is a femoral artery PICC line type of placement, no problem, but it took probably 10 minutes to do that whole procedure. Then they went in and did a normal IV in his upper arm. The first one they missed, weren't able to get a good flow, so they tried a second one, and that was easily done. As Mark said, Mr. Hooper was in pretty good spirits through the whole time. He was chuckling and interacting, and then after the IVs were in and the warden came and read the execution warrant, he made his last statement and actually turned and waved to us. I caught eye contact with him briefly, and he laughed again. And then he seemed to be a little concerned. It was taking a while. Everyone, they said, "Let the execution start," and it was quiet, You know, there was absolutely not a word said among all the witnesses through the whole time. Of course, that's on the other side of the glass, but it was quiet in his room, and he actually looked around and said, "What's taking so long?" So the drugs were very effective almost immediately from what I could witness. Once they started flowing, his right hand, the fingers began to twitch a little bit. Within 30, 40, 50 seconds at the most, his mouth opened, and that was his last movement. 5 minutes later, they said that he was sedated, and a few minutes after that, they pronounced him dead.
Did you see any witnesses, sir, from either Mr. Hooper's side or the victim's side at all, and could you gauge their reaction?
Well, I did not spend a lot of time looking at other witnesses. I felt my role was to keep an eye on everything that Mr. Hooper was experiencing so that I could report it accurately. There was at least one person, female, who witnessed on, they didn't identify who the witnesses were. There was defense, family and defense. There were some prosecutors, and there were some representatives that were supposedly of the family, but they were all apparently there were no direct family. They were all prosecutors or people who've worked on the case. There was a woman who seemed to sound like she might have been sobbing a couple of times after the drugs started flowing. I can't confirm that. She was two benches over from me. I couldn't see her face, but that was my impression.
When was the last execution that you witnessed?
I believe it was in 2013, and at that time we were not allowed to see the IV placements.
How was this one different in any other way?
There were, other than not being able to see the IV placement, which is twice as long as the actual execution itself, at that time they opened the curtain and the person was strapped to the gurney, and all that pre-work had been done. This time we got an extra half hour, essentially, of being able to watch Mr. Hooper interact with the execution team, with the security people, and with the doctors who were placing the IVs. And from that point on, it seemed exactly as before. Last time it was a 3-drug cocktail, and it worked perfectly. The next year in 2014, it didn't. And that's when we had an execution that really was, some people call it botched. It obviously took hours instead of minutes. And they've since changed the protocol. It's 1 drug only, and it appeared, in my view, to be very efficient.
Well, could you tell us how you knew that it wasn't a cut down?
I was watching it directly. There was no scalpel. The devices are similar to what I have seen used on me, and I've spent some time in the hospital over many years. So. So what generally the process is that they went in, they cleaned the area. They were very good about sterile procedures throughout the whole situation. The doctor or the nurse, whoever was actually performing it, I think it was probably a doctor, changed to a sterile gloves, put a sterile shield over it that had an opening for that area, used the sonogram device, what appeared to be a sonogram device, to fully locate where the femoral artery would be. Took out a long, generally there's an item called a PICC line that is an IV that they put into a main artery and that they run quite a ways in, and that's a direct line into an artery, and it's sewed into place, and that's exactly what they did. I watched him suture it on after it had been placed. Not that I saw. I did not identify anyone from the governor's office. No.
Does anybody have any other questions? Any of our media witnesses? Okay, great. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Okay, so with that, as we do not have any victim family members speaking who would normally speak at this moment, we will pass out the statement that we have available to you. Thank you so much for coming, and this concludes our press conference. You are welcome to broadcast from the media staging area as much as you would like today. And I think that's probably where all of you are parked now. So the vans are here and available to take you back to that area. But again, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.
If a few of us have questions for DOC, would you be able to take those now?
It depends on what they are. I need to know what your questions are first.
Yeah, they're about the process, because, some of us have applied to be media witnesses.
Yes.
We've been turned down several times. Can you describe that process?
Yes, I can describe the process. We have to look at who's coming from the family members, from the media, from public witnesses as well, and the inmate family members, if there are any. Today it was the defense team. Our department order policy says, and it's Department Order 710, that we can have anywhere from 1 to 5 media witnesses. It is up to the director's discretion